this continues our videos on custom Ajax callbacks. So what we've seen is that when you do the callback, the values for the current row are going to be available to us in the e.underbar current row data object. But now let's go ahead and make this into an editable grid. So we'll go there and click that button over there, and now let's go ahead now and do a callback. And in the first row here you can see that the current value is Michael Jones, so I'm going to go here and change that to Tom Smith and then do a callback. And let's go take a look now inside the E object. So you can see that the current row data shows Tom Smith, so e.current row data new first name is Tom. But if I go back there and look at old data, you can see that there's the original value for that field. So that's good information to know, the original value and the new value on the field that are being sent back in the callback. And as we discussed earlier, the checkbox row keys contains the keys of the rows that were checked when you do the submit. So what I'm going to do now is actually switch to another grid that'll make this demonstration of the keys that are being sent back a little easier to understand. Because in the case right now I'm working with DBFs, and the primary key of each record is in a DBF by default is just the record number. But let's switch now to a SQL grid over here, and you can see that I've got a grid now that is based on the Northwind's order details table, and the primary key for this table is actually a multi-field primary key. Order ID and product ID are both part of the primary key. So let's go now and check row 1 and row 10. So you can see that on row 1 the primary key is going to be 10248 for the order ID, and then 11 for the product ID, and then similarly for row 10 there's the order ID and the product ID. So I'll click my button that opens up the callback handler, and now let's go ahead and take a look at what's inside the checked rows object. And so you can see basically we sent back 2 rows, so therefore there's keys 1 and keys 2 exists, basically one of these objects for each row that was submitted. So for example, on the second row that we submitted, which was row number 10, if we go to this keys property, we can see that we have an array with 2 entries in the array. And the reason that there are 2 entries in the array is that the primary key for this record had 2 fields in it. So there's the first value, 10251. So this is the value of the order ID that was checked, and 57. This is the value of the part number that was checked. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that for each row that was submitted, that was checked, basically there's an entry in the e.checked rows object. So there'll be, if for example 4 rows were checked, there'll be e.checked rows dot key 1, dot key 2, dot key 3, and dot key 4, and dot key 1 is going to be an array with an entry for each column in the primary key. So in this case the primary key has 2 columns, so there'll be 2 entries over there. In the case of a DBF that just uses record number as the primary key, this array would have a single entry, and it would have the record number of the row that was submitted. So basically the sort of key point to remember here is that by putting a debug1 statement into your Ajax callback handler and then going into working preview, you can get a terrific insight into what's actually available to you in the E object. Thank you very much.